In this video tutorial, we're going to look at some of the techniques that go into making an accessible Word document, and after it's exported, an accessible PDF. I'll show you these techniques in the context of making an existing document accessible, a process which, in the world of accessibility, you'll often hear referred to as remediation, but these techniques could just as easily be applied to a document you're creating from scratch, and that's ultimately the goal for us here at the UC. To create documents that are accessible from the start and don't need remediation. And, as the video's parenthetical subtitle implies, these same remediation techniques can help you become, in general, a Microsoft Word power user, so they're well worth learning. Before we go any further though, a few quick notes. First, I want to thank the UC Women's Initiative for Professional Development Program, which you may hear referred to as UCWE, for generously allowing us to use their nomination process document for the purpose of this tutorial. If you'd like to learn more about this fantastic program, please check out their website, which is linked in the video description. Second, this tutorial is not meant as a first-time introduction to electronic accessibility, so if you're totally unfamiliar with the topic, while you are welcome to try following along, I also encourage you to search the UC Learning Center for accessibility trainings available at your location, and to check out the Office of the President IT Electronic Accessibility website, also linked in the video description. Lastly, since this video is pretty long, we've included a table of contents within the video description that you can use to identify and jump to specific sections or topics within this tutorial. Alright then, let's get started. So, here you can see the document we're going to be working with. It looks great, very well organized, very professional, probably the type of document you're pretty used to seeing at the UC. But it does have a few accessibility issues we can resolve, and we can do that without this document looking significantly different. This is something I want to stress. Remediation will sometimes result in a few minor visual differences, but it can often be achieved while maintaining the same exact visual styling you had in the original document. The first thing I'm going to do in this remediation process is turn on the Show Paragraph Marks feature, which is toggled through this paragraph symbol button in the Home tab's paragraph pane. This feature is going to help show where some of our changes need to be made, starting with this empty paragraph right at the very top of the document, which is indicated by this paragraph symbol. Each of these paragraph symbols you see throughout the page denotes a paragraph break, also known as a hard return, which you get when you press the Enter key. Assistive technology tools, such as screen readers, rely on these separations to indicate individual groupings of text. The text in a grouping is read together, as a unit, and by separating groupings from each other, you can give some groupings unique meanings, such as being a particular heading, a list item, etc. For instance, the purpose text is intended to be a heading, whereas the sentence beneath it is intended to be the body text associated with that heading. So there needs to be a separation between the two groupings so that one can be a heading and the other can be body text. The problem with empty paragraph breaks, that is, paragraph breaks that are not associated with any actual text and are just being used to create vertical space within a page, like this one at the top of this document, is that screen readers may still recognize them as groupings of text, but as empty ones. So they might read blank or something like it whenever they encounter them. Just like this. Here, listen.
Blank,
As a screen reader user, it can get pretty frustrating having to hear something like
blank,
every time someone wants to add a line of vertical spacing in a document. Plus, it can be confusing, since there are other things that can cause a screen reader to return,
blank,
so the screen reader user can never be quite certain if they're reading through empty lines or actual text content that they're missing for some reason. There are other ways to achieve vertical spacing in Word, and in most typesetting programs, that do not have this byproduct for screen reader users. So one of the big changes we're going to make in this document is to remove all of these empty paragraphs and replace them with an alternative vertical spacing method that won't send unwanted signals to a screen reader. So I'll start by removing this first empty paragraph space, simply by putting my cursor in that line of text and pressing delete. But look, immediately we have a problem. We've lost some of the styling rules we want to maintain. So let's back up with an undo and leave that empty paragraph there for just a moment as we move on to the next accessibility issue in need of resolving. This text here, 2019 UC Women's Initiative for Professional Development, is essentially the document title, so it deserves to be tagged, as we would say in accessibility terms, as what is known as a Heading 1, or H1. Headings are very important structure and navigation guides to accessibility tools like screen readers, They impart the hierarchical organization of content that we can see visually, much as you would see in an outline like this one, which has heading 2s within a heading 1 and heading 3s within heading 2s, and body text within all the heading sections, and they allow screen reader users to easily jump from section to section within a document by jumping from heading to heading. Here's an example.
Heading level 1 UC locations, Northern California. Heading 2 heading level 2, Berkeley. Heading 3 heading level 3, Davis. Heading 3 heading level 3.
Documents should only ever have one heading 1. It is essentially the title, or the parent topic, that all the document contents fall within. So this title here at the top needs to be tagged as a heading 1. To do that, I'll highlight the full title and head up to the heading 1 style in the Home tab style pane. But as you can see a preview of when I hover my cursor over that heading 1 style, there's a slight problem. If I choose this style, it will change the text's visual appearance, which I don't want to happen. That's because in Word, applying a style applies not only a tag, such as heading 1, heading 2, normal text, etc., which I need, but also the visual styling rules associated with that style. So I need an option that applies the heading 1 tag while maintaining the text's current visual appearance. The solution is to right-click on the heading 1 style and choose the first option, Update Heading 1 to Match Selection. Now my heading 1 style has the same visual appearance as the document title, and as you can now see by heading 1 having this gray highlight box in the style pane when my cursor is in the title has already been tagged as a heading 1. It was a byproduct of using that Update Heading to Match Selection feature. So now we can delete that empty paragraph, and even though we again lost the visual style, because we in fact lost the heading 1 tag as well, our title has been automatically retagged as normal or body text, we can reapply both quite easily by putting our cursor in that title text and clicking the heading 1 style once more. Now we just need to reapply the layout that was achieved by having the empty paragraph space there, but in a way that won't register as a blank for screen readers. Specifically, I'll want to add something called before paragraph spacing. That is, some vertical spacing before this title paragraph. When using and applying styles in Word, there are two ways of modifying the format of text that has had a style applied to it. You can modify the style itself using the Modify Styles feature, which will apply the same formatting changes to all the instances of text that have had that style applied to them, or you can modify an individual instance of text using the usual font and paragraph formatting options up here in the Home tab. With a heading 1, it doesn't matter as much which of those two methods you choose, since there will only be one instance of a heading 1 in the document, so I'll just modify this singular instance instead of modifying the heading 1 style. So, with my cursor still in this title, I'll head up to the paragraph pane in the Home tab and click this expand looking icon to bring up the paragraph settings panel. Then I'll head down to the spacing portion and add some before paragraph spacing. I think 15 points ought to do it. And click OK. Now I have the same vertical spacing above the title as I had before we removed the empty paragraph break. Now, there's one last thing to do with this heading, and perhaps you've noticed it because you were paying attention to the paragraph marks. You see, there's a paragraph mark after both lines of text in the title, and as we discussed earlier, that means that to accessibility tools like screen readers, these are actually two separate titles that will be read separately, but we want them to be one title. So I'm going to place my cursor before Program and press Delete a few times to remove that paragraph break and make this a single title. Lastly, I want to recreate that two-line separation we had a moment ago in between the closed parenthesis and Program. So I'm going to place my cursor where I want the separation to occur, but instead of pressing the Enter key, which would create a paragraph break, I'm going to press Shift plus Enter together, creating what is called a soft break between the two lines of text, indicated in paragraph marks by this elbow arrow icon. Soft breaks separate lines of text without creating separation that would be detected by screen readers. So to a screen reader, this is still a single title that will all be read together. Alright, so next let's sweep through this document and remove all these other empty paragraph spaces and replace them with the more accessible layout alternative, before or after paragraph spacing. This first empty space beneath the title, I'll delete that, open up the paragraph settings panel, and add 15 points of after paragraph spacing to go with the 15 points of before paragraph spacing we added earlier. Next, I'll delete the empty paragraph space after this first bit of body text, but in this case, instead of modifying the paragraph settings of this individual instance, I'm going to modify the settings of all the body text in the document. or normal text as it's referred to in the Styles pane. To do this, I'll right-click on the Normal Text button in the Styles pane and choose Modify. In the resulting Modify Style panel, I'm going to head down to the drop menu labeled Format at the bottom, open it, and select Paragraph to get to the Paragraph Settings. In the resulting Paragraph Settings panel, I'll head down to the Spacing section and add 10 points of after paragraph spacing, since 10 points is both a good amount and, for many Word users, is the default setting along with a line spacing setting of multiple 1.15. I'll click the OK button here in the Paragraph Settings panel, then again in the Modify panel, and voila! As you can see, the new after paragraph spacing setting has been applied to all my text. So now I can start deleting these problematic, and now no longer necessary, empty paragraph breaks. But before I move on to the next one, let's address this purpose text. Accessibility standards dictate that if text has visually been made to look like a heading, it needs to be tagged as a heading. And I think it's fair to say that purpose, sponsors and management, target audience, etc., these have all been made to look like headings, so they need to actually be headings. Specifically, they should all be heading 2s, since within the document's hierarchical model, they're all direct children of our heading 1. And remember, we want to maintain their previous styling, including, for the most part, the lack of after paragraph spacing they had before we modified the normal style a moment ago. So, I'll highlight Purpose, head up to the Styles pane, right-click on Heading 2, and again choose the Update Style, in this case Heading 2, to match selection option. Then I'll again right-click on Heading 2, choose Modify, open up the paragraph settings, and instead of removing the 10 points of after paragraph spacing, I'll change it to 2 points, so there's still a bit of extra vertical spacing to help with readability. Now Purpose looks pretty much as it did before, but it's a Heading 2. Before we move on to eliminating some of the other empty paragraph breaks you can see in this document, let's quickly address this image at the top. If you're familiar with electronic accessibility, you probably know that most images need descriptive alt text, so that accessibility tools know how to interpret them. So, let's select the image, right-click on it, and choose Format Picture so we can get to the alt text settings here in the Format Picture pane's Layout and Properties tab. This image is actually the UC Women's Initiative for Professional Development logo, so I think the best alt text to use would be UC Women's Initiative for Professional Development logo. That conveys what the image is, a logo, and it includes all the text that is visible in the image, which is something I usually recommend doing when there's text in an image. Include all that text in the alt text. Let's also quickly check the image's text wrapping because, yep, just like I suspected, it has text wrapping. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that when we export this to PDF, it's going to tell screen readers that this is the last element in the page, since elements with text wrapping will always be ordered after inline elements, like our text. Since I want this image ordered first in the page, as it appears visually, and I don't want to have to manually reorder it in Adobe Acrobat after I've published this to PDF, what I'll do is change its text wrap setting to inline with the text. Now, as you can see, that change had some unwanted formatting byproducts, but I can easily correct those. First, since the image is now inline, it's beholden to the page margins, so it has been moved to the right and no longer fits on the page. So I'll resize it to being 7.5 inches wide, so it now fits perfectly within the page margins. Next, it appears that Word now thinks this image is a heading 1 because there's no break between it and the actual heading 1 beneath it. So I'll set my cursor after the image and press Enter to add a paragraph break. And then I'll select the image and change it to normal text, so it's no longer recognized as a heading. Now this image will be ordered first in the page and looks sufficiently similar to how it did before. So now I'm going to continue going through the page, deleting the empty paragraph breaks where I encounter them, and converting all these should be headings to heading 2s. The last thing I want to do on this page is address this list that's cut off and continues on the next page. Why not have this list be altogether on one page? I happen to know I have room in the document to accommodate that, so I'll set my cursor before the Participant Criteria heading, open the Layout tab, then the Breaks drop menu, and add a Next Page section break. I could have used the other page break option instead, but it often results in an added empty paragraph break that I'd have to delete. So I'll go with the method that I know has fewer steps. Alright, so I'll make my way through the second page, making more of the changes we've discussed, until I get to this nomination timeline heading. First, I'm going to separate it from the parenthetical note with a paragraph break so that each can be individually tagged. Second, I'm going to apply the heading 2 style to nomination timeline. And third, I'm going to again apply a next page section break before the heading so it will be on the same page as the table it introduces. Next, let's take a look at that table. It doesn't have some of the issues we'll fix in the other upcoming tables, but it does have one accessibility feature we need to add: table headers. These will help screen reader users contextualize what is in each of the table's data cells that they encounter. To add them, I'll highlight the top row, right-click, and choose Table Properties from the resulting menu. Then I'll select the Repeat as Header row at the top of each page checkbox and click OK to save the change. I also want to do something about the amount of vertical spacing in this table, because the text here doesn't need the same after-paragraph spacing as the text elsewhere in the document, because the table cells have internal margins, or padding, that provide sufficient space. So, I'm going to select all the text in the table, head up to the Styles pane, open it, and choose Create a Style. I'll name my new style, in this case, Table Text, and then click the Modify button to open the Modify panel. I'll change the style type to Paragraph, make sure the style based on is normal, since what I'm essentially creating is a modified version of the normal style. Unselect bold, which was selected at first likely because the text in this table's first cell is bold. Then I'll open the Format Paragraph Settings panel and change the 10 points of after paragraph spacing to 0. This next table has a trickier issue we need to solve. It has these merge cells here at the top, and those can be a problem for screen readers. So what I'm going to do instead is turn this into 2 tables, then use headings to replace those merged cells I'm going to remove, and a 2-column section to keep the 2 tables visually side by side. First, I'm going to move this faux footnote beneath the table to being above the table so that screen readers read it before they encounter any of the text within the table it's meant to clarify. Second, I'll add the first of my 2 headers, North, beneath that text and make it a heading 3. Since it's intended as a child of the heading 2 above it, not up here. I'll also make a few quick modifications to the heading 3 style for better visual design. Next, I'll delete the row that has the merged cells and turn the first row into a header row, same as you saw with the last table. Then I'll remove these paragraph breaks from the table that shouldn't be there. I'll also apply the table text style and reapply bold to the table headers. Alright, now with the table pretty much as I'd want it, I'm going to select it and the north header above it, copy them, and paste another instance directly beneath the first. Next, I'll change that second header to south and delete from each of the 2 tables the 4 columns that no longer apply. Now I need to make this 2 columns. I'll select everything from the first header through to the end of the second table. I'll open the Layout tab, then open the Columns menu and choose 2. Since I selected the content I want in these 2 columns first, before adding the columns, Word knows I only want that content set into columns, so it automatically added 2 continuous section breaks before and after this section. Those breaks are necessary to apply a unique layout rule, such as columns, to only a particular section and not the entire document. I could also have added them manually and then applied the 2-column layout anywhere within the section to achieve the same result. Finally, I'll clean up these empty paragraph breaks, and even though I don't need to, I'll put my cursor before the south header, open the Breaks menu, and choose the column break. That will tell Word to end the first column before this point and move everything after it to the second column. Again, not really necessary because the content was already divided amongst the 2 columns exactly as I wanted it, but if you ever need to manually determine where one column ends and the next column picks up, now you know you can do that with a column break. So, I have my 2 tables side by side, similar to how they were arranged in the original design, and as one last touch, I'll add in a next page section break after the tables, before the next header, so that it and the entire section it introduces can be together on the same page. Alright, now let's look at this next table. It has 2 issues we'll want to clean up. The first you may have guessed at. It has a merged cell here in the top row that needs to be separated. So I'll put my cursor in the cell, open the Table Tools Layout tab, and choose Split Cells. In the resulting Split Cells panel, I'm going to confirm that I want to split this into 2 columns in 1 row. Next, I just need to give each of the split cells a unique label. So I'll adjust the first cell to be North Location, since that's what's in that column, and I'll add South Location to the other. The second issue with this table is a little less obvious, but you'll notice it if you pay attention to the paragraph marks. See how this table has multiple paragraph break symbols on its right side, whereas our previous tables do not? That's because this table has different text wrap settings, which means A, it will have to have empty paragraph breaks there in order to maintain this visual appearance, and B, it will be out of order relative to the other content on this page, because remember, when exported to PDF, text wrapped elements are ordered after inline elements, just like we discussed earlier with the logo image. So I'm going to right-click in this table, bring up the table properties, and in the very first tab, Table, I'm going to change the text wrapping setting from around to none. I'll finish up by making some of the other table changes you've seen previously. Alright, so moving on, I've got a bunch of empty paragraph breaks to delete. I'll update this text to a heading, update this first table row to being a header row, and tweak this table text so the table fits fully on the page. The next, and I believe last new issue for us to discuss in this document is this contact section here, which you can see I've altered a tad to remove any names or identifying details. The problem with this section is that its layout is actually being facilitated by a table, and it's a general accessibility rule that tables not be used for layout purposes, and instead only be used to present tabular data. So I need to get this text out of this table and again aim to recreate a similar visual look by using a two-column layout. First, I'll copy all the text in the table and paste it outside the table using the specific paste option that will preserve only the text, not the table. As you can see though, that jumbled up the order a bit, so I'll need to move portions around to get back to what we want. Once I've done that, I'll again highlight all the content I want to set in two columns, open the Layout tab, then the columns menu, and choose 2. I'm also going to change the after paragraph spacing in this section since the 10 points being applied to normal text like this is too much. I think 2 points is better. Lastly, I'll delete the old table. The last few things I'll do in this document are all things you've seen previously. I'll remove these empty paragraph breaks, I'll convert this to a single heading 2 that's split into 2 lines of text using a soft break. I'll convert these to heading 3s, make their first rows header rows, and split the merged cell each table has into 2 cells. Then I'll do all of that again for the rest of the tables in this document. And that's it. Now the document is fully accessible as a Word document, and if I export it to PDF, I'll find that it's automatically tagged and ordered exactly as it needs to be for that format as well. Thanks for following along and doing your part to improve electronic accessibility throughout the UC.